We have seen some absolutely huge open worlds lately, but exactly how big are we talking? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, the 10 biggest game worlds of the last 3 years. Starting off at number 10 with Red Dead Redemption 2. When Red Dead 2 came out, Rockstar boasted that it had the biggest map ever in a Rockstar game, and while that is not quite the case, the GTA 5 map is slightly larger. Red Dead 2 definitely feels bigger, and this is in part because you travel primarily on horseback. The actual speed of movement is a lot slower than Grand Theft Auto 5, and the roads that you travel are a lot more winding and complex, which make it harder to get from point A to point B. On the other hand, RDR2 is significantly bigger than the original Red Dead. Another reason the game is so big is that it actually includes sections of the original game in it. It's pretty much 2 game worlds stuck together, with only the Mexico portion of the map left out of the sequel. Red Dead Redemption 2 takes place in 5 states with a ton of visual variety between them. There's New Austin, the area that covers the first chapter of the original game and is a dusty desert. West Elizabeth, that contains the city of Blackwater and a lot of rolling plains. New Hanover, which is a sort of heartlands area with green grass and rolling hills. Lemoyne, which has the biggest city in the game and a lot of murky swamps. And finally, Ambarino, which has almost all snowy mountains and high hills. Fast travel is also really limited in the game, so a lot of the travel can't be avoided, and on top of the impressive visual variety to each area, it just feels enormous. Even if it isn't actually as big as a lot of other games, it's just a massive game, for sure, but in terms of game size, it's actually the smallest on this list by a pretty big margin. We are not saying this game is small, just that everything else here is even bigger. At number 9 is Cyberpunk 2077, which is between 100 and 110 square kilometers, or 39 to 42 square miles. Yeah, for a game that mostly takes place in a single city and some small areas outside of it, this game is surprisingly big. It is interesting though, because in comparison to RDR2, it feels way smaller, even if the actual square miles are bigger. Of course, a big part of that is that you have a car to roll around in. Another is that fast travel. It's easy to use, it's all over the place. And another is you're primarily moving around Night City, and that's about it. I mean, it's not like the whole city looks the same. There actually is a lot of variety in different areas, but it doesn't feel as varied as RDR2, and it doesn't actually feel like one of the biggest open worlds in the past few years, even if it actually is. But just because it doesn't feel massive doesn't mean there isn't a lot of cool stuff to see. It's pretty clearly based off of Los Angeles, and most of the stuff you'd expect to see from that city is here. There's the Hollywood Hills in North Oak, South Central with the Haywood area, downtown with the city center and Corpo Plaza. Pretty much everything you'd expect to see in LA is here. And there's some pretty cool stuff outside of all that too, like Rancho Coronado, which is this community built into the flood area of a massive dam, or the massive junkyard just outside the city, or the Columbarium, the strange graveyard area. Hell, there are cool places to explore in the center of the city too, like the Arasaka Memorial is right next to the massive Arasaka building. Being an open world game you play in first person, the level of detail in some of these areas is incredible. Some less incredible though. Still, Night City is a pretty cool place to explore, and it's one of the biggest open worlds of the year. At number 8 is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is 140 square kilometers or 54 square miles. It feels like Assassin's Creed games just keep getting bigger and bigger, and Valhalla's map definitely not an exception. It's huge, and it's actually even bigger than it first appears. Sure, you don't have access to all of England. There's more like a large chunk of the southeast part of the island, but what is there is a lot. Because they're not trying to slam the entire country onto the map, the actual scale of things feels more realistic than in past games, though it is obviously still very compressed compared to the real world. What's wild about this game though is just how much more of it there is. It's not just England and a small portion of Norway, there's also 2 mythical locations to explore with Asgard and Jotunheim. And on top of that, there's Vinland, aka the American continent, that is a separate area for you to explore later in the game. It's huge, and on top of being a beautiful game, a lot of the time there's a decent amount of visual variety. A lot of England looks relatively the same, but compare the cliffs of Dover to the autumn forests of Lincolnshire, and you'll see how different the areas are at least trying to be. It's also a game with easy fast travel that still feels huge. Like, it would be big enough just with England, but there's 4 other areas on top of that. It's almost excessive. At number 7 is Forza Horizon 4, which is 134 square kilometers or 52 square miles. This is the first open world racing game on the list. It should come as no surprise that it's big. It's a game where the only thing you do is drive, so you'd think there would be a lot of roads to drive on, and there should be. It's set mostly in the English countryside, so the game doesn't have a ton of visual variety to different parts of the map, but what it does have is a season system where the changing conditions can affect the actual road, and the effects are actually really cool. It's still mostly an arcade racing experience, but dealing with rain-slicked roads or heavy snow can still significantly affect your driving ability, and it's not all like it's just farmland either. There's places like Edinburgh and the Horizon Festival grounds to mix things up. On top of that, the game's just really good looking in general. When it comes to open world racing games, it's not the biggest world out there, but it's definitely one of the better ones. And to be frank, like racing games always have incredible graphics. Forza Horizon 4 does not break that trend. At number 6 is Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is 90.7 square miles. We talked about Valhalla for a reason, it's huge, but Odyssey, still bigger. Being set in the entire country of Greece obviously will do that. Pretty much every major city and location is covered here. Athens, Sparta, Thebes, the list goes on. There are massive cities too, fertile valleys, rocky islands, and just about everything you would think of when you think of ancient Greece. And while the entire map is huge, there is a really important thing to keep in mind here. A lot of it is kind of just water. Taking place where it does, that is to be expected, but in comparison to some of the previous open worlds on this list, this one is a lot more empty between the major hotspots, and most of the sea areas don't really have anything substantial in them. It does make the map a lot bigger, but it is not as dense as some of the other open worlds we've talked about today, or even just some of the other open worlds, period. Still, the scale is impressive, to say the very least. The fact that you can stand on a mountain and see all of these cities you recognize from so far away is beyond cool, and honestly, it's probably one of the best vistas in a game, period. At number 5 is Just Cause 4, which is 395.2 square miles. Yeah, the biggest open world is over 300 square miles bigger than the last. Just Cause kind of pride themselves on being huge, and the most recent entry is absolutely no exception. Sure, they're not nearly as dense as other open world games, but with the crazy movement powers you get, they're some of the most fun games to just screw around in. Getting around in this game is an absolute cinch. You've got 3 main tools, a grappling hook, a parachute, and a wingsuit. Using these 3 tools in tandem, you can basically be Superman. So you never have to touch the ground if you don't want to, and you can zip around the world at lightning speed. This time the events of the game take place on the island of Solus, which has 4 distinct climates. There's jungles in the east, plains in the south, desert in the west, and massive snowy mountains at the center. With these areas, what you see is basically what you get. There's the relatively small capital area, a metric ton of military bases for you to destroy, and a whole lot of open country. Honestly, it's pretty empty, but it's also kind of the appeal of these games, just the massive scale and, like I said, your ability to get around so easily. Compared to other open world games, there is not a ton to discover. It's all about enemy bases and taking in the sights. And it's definitely not the best game on this list, but it is fun for what it is, and for what it is, you get a lot. At number 4 is Ghost Recon Breakpoint, which is 781 square miles. Here's actually an example of how bigger doesn't always mean better. Set on the island of Aurora, which funnily enough is significantly bigger than the entirety of Bolivia from Ghost Recon Wildlands, which is only about 170 square miles. You do your special forces thing against an army of mercenaries who have taken the place over. Looking at the map, you think there wouldn't be much visual variety, and there actually aren't a ton of different biomes or anything, but the actual locations add a lot of variety that would normally be a pretty samey world. The fact that this is an island inhabited by a tech company is really what makes this world stand out. There are a lot of cool structures to explore that aren't just run-of-the-mill, run-down military bases and like stuff that you find in other open world games. And you can see how they put a lot of work in to make these different places stand out. And the important thing to mention is that though the map is huge, a ton of it is just inaccessible water. Like, a good chunk has absolutely nothing on it, so the actual size of the playable area of the game is a lot smaller than the map. In fact, we don't really know how big that would be, but by many estimations, it's still bigger than all of Wildlands. However, the game is still kind of a mess in a lot of ways, and the open world is still kind of too big for its own good, because there's really nothing to do in between each hotspot, but if you're an explorer, there are some cool things to see. And number 3 is the Crew 2, which is between 5,000 and 7,000 square kilometers, or 1,931 to 2,703 square miles. Like, not a surprise that this game would show up on the list. The Crew 2 is basically an amusement park version of the United States, and considering the US is pretty dang big, even a significantly shrunk down version of it is absolutely gigantic. All the major landmarks are here, from Los Angeles to New York City, and they've obviously been redesigned to be more fun to drive around in. And that's the thing, while the Crew 2 is much bigger than the first game, what really makes a difference for the actual gameplay is the fact that they've added off-road vehicles and airplanes to the mix, so there's actually something to do in the vast wilderness of the country rather than just driving past it. The funny thing about this game is that while you're playing it, you just kind of notice how small things are in comparison to the real thing. Like, you can be in and out of LA in 10 minutes in this game, or you notice how small and shallow the Grand Canyon appears to the real thing, stuff like that. But because the world is so big, you can't help compare it, and when you do, it actually feels small rather than huge. And believe me, the world in this game is absolutely huge. And when it comes to very big worlds that are still handcrafted, the Crew 2 has pretty much everything else beat. And number 2 is Atlas, which is 45,000 square kilometers, or 17.3 thousand square miles. Do you remember Atlas? Like, there was a huge amount of hype for this one before it quickly died, mostly thanks to the awesome trailer they released before launch. The actual game, though, has so little in common with the trailer that they showed. There is one thing we have to give the developers, though. The game is absolutely massive. Yeah, it's basically just a series of empty islands and a whole lot of water, and most players don't even survive long enough to see all the island they even start on, let alone another one, but in terms of size, it is huge. Seriously, this isn't like Forza or an Assassin's Creed game or anything. The map is huge, and there are some interesting landmarks to find, and it's not all just random jungles, but for the most part, what you'll be doing in this game is tediously crafting the basics of survival, and not going on an epic adventure to see the world. And finally, number 1 is Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is literally as big as the Earth. There's not a lot else to say about it. It is literally based on maps of the Earth. There are some weird things that happen due to the way that it bases things off big maps, but it's literally based off of big maps. It's huge, and it's accurate too. If you want to fly a plane, it's going to take you the amount of time to do anything that it actually would. There are no scale concerns. This is Earth. You are playing on Earth, our world, and that's it. And it's also actually it. That's the end of the video. Which one of these is your favorite open world to play around in? Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first, of course, is a subscription. So click subscribe and don't forget to enable all notifications. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter, Falcon the Hero. We'll see you next time right here on gameranx.